I'll go ahead and hit record to the cloud. Okay, great. So tonight we're going to talk about assessing farmland. I'm going to mute those of you that have sound until we kind of get to the discussion point so we don't have a lot of background noises. So before we jump into our new topic, I wanted to do a touch base about the homework for last week. So those pieces were to complete the financial self-assessment worksheet, and then to prepare a personal balance statement, draft an income statement for a future farm enterprise, and draft a personal cash flow statement. So I do have some polls, and I'm going to go ahead and share those now. So let's see. So the first one is about your balance sheet. Were you able to develop a personal balance sheet? So we'll give it another second. Okay. I'm going to show, because we know that we have a couple people that aren't able to do the polls. So we're kind of in a mix. Yes, it's complete, in progress, but not quite there. And then a few notes and not far along. So for those of you that were able to kind of jump into that balance sheet, what are some of the things that you found doing that made it easy or made it more difficult? And you'll just have to unmute when you want to speak. So I can ask another point of question. Was it helpful to have gathered the financial statements that you did the week before? So you went through that financial checklist, and were you able to use those in working on your balance sheet?
This is Emily. I'll just share that I have a personal balance sheet and most of the information pulled together because I took a financial freedom course that was actually really interesting, and not about farming, but it went through a lot of those practices and goal setting ahead of time and really understanding our finances and coming up with a long-term or a short-term retirement plan, ideally, which is pretty much relevant to agriculture because you have to have income more than likely from our savings and investments to be able to cover our costs if we choose to both leave our corporate jobs in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's interesting how that course prepared me further to evaluate how I might want to approach agriculture.
Yeah, that is interesting. I think, Mackenzie, do you want to just take on if Janelle and Ryan put things in the chat that you can share on their behalf?
Yeah. Karen also added something in the chat that the course documents were helpful, and her husband has a degree that covers these topics as well. And Janelle and Ryan said it's hard to get the value of machinery and equipment that is older, and there's a lot. Do you know of a good source for pricing on farm equipment?
Actually, what I think I would do for farm equipment, one of the things I might do is call a local implement dealer and ask what a trade-in value would be on that equipment, because that's going to give you an idea. It's going to be a little bit lower than if you were going to find a direct buyer. The other option would be to go through some of the national Craigslist and see if you can find some type of comparable equipment that you would be able to do a valuation of it using that, because it is really hard, and sometimes older equipment is just so unique that it is hard to value it. But those are the two places I would start. The other thing you can think about is, what would it cost to replace that equipment, even if it's not a brand new piece but a bit of an older piece? And then you could just do some estimates about what the value of that equipment is. And one of the questions that we can put on the list for next week, I'm going to be meeting with our Northwest Farm Credit speaker for next week, is I can specifically ask him as well on how they would value equipment and find those rates. There might be something like a Kelly Blue Book for equipment that they have access to. Any other comments about the personal balance sheet? I think one of the things that's really interesting that we see in agriculture is that many times in terms of that balance sheet, people really have the equity in their land as their retirement plan, which in some senses makes sense because land appreciates and it has real value. On the other hand, it's one of the reasons that land seekers right now are having such a hard time finding agricultural land, because it's an investment that even if it's a farmer that is selling that land, that's where their equity is. And without a separate retirement plan from your land, it makes it very hard to transition that land at a price point for agriculture versus a price point for development. So that's something to think about in terms of your personal goals going forward. If you have a value of the land that you ultimately purchase for agriculture, staying in agriculture, that's through a succession plan with your heirs, or that you want to be able to have somebody farm it when you are ready to retire off that land, you'll really need to develop a retirement portfolio that is not 100% dependent upon the value of your land. Okay, we are going to go on and do another poll, very similar, and this is about the cash flow statement. So one of the assignments was to do your personal cash flow statement. How did that go? If one person, that's a couple people. See. Give it a second, another person. Okay, I'm going to end the polling and share the results. Okay, here we are. So this is something that fewer people were able to kind of get behind and think about. So I'd like, just to open it up, what are some of the challenges with creating a cash flow statement? You don't have to be shy, because you're all in the same boat together.
Like, just the time that it takes to figure out everything, because we don't budget really right now, so we don't have all of that stuff already.
Yeah, so getting the documents together and the system in place is definitely a challenge.
I think for me, it was too like I'm nowhere near deciding what we might produce. I'm whittling the list down of what I don't want to do. So it's hard to think about what those cash flows may look like. And even this week, we were talking about like a new idea of cover crop seeds specifically for pollinators. And I was like, whoa. And I started digging into the financials of some of that. And then that was like my whole time that I had set aside. So.
Sure. Yeah. Any other thoughts about it? Well, one of the good things of like taking this class and kind of tiptoeing into it and understanding how much time it takes is going to be helpful when you are in a situation where you want to procure land and you're required to create a cash flow statement to have a bit of an idea of what it's going to take and the type of financial documents that you're going to need to get together to do that. And one of the things that you might consider doing now that's going to make that easier in the future is to think about getting a really simple version of Quicken or QuickBooks, the kind that you can download your bank statements into. And it's a pretty small amount of money for the most minimal version of those. And you can just start to download those and catalog your expenses, because ultimately you could create a cash flow statement if you're using a financial management system like Quicken or QuickBooks. And the feature of having it be able to download your bank statements, and then you just identify and catalog those costs on a chart of accounts, would be really helpful to move forward to understand what that looks like because then you can print out a whole bunch of different statements. And so instead of having to re-enter that financial information every time you want to create a statement, you're pulling it out of your database essentially to develop the type of statements that you're going to need. So that's one thing that I would recommend, is looking at those different tools that you have. Plus, both Quicken and QuickBooks have a lot of online support. There are many farmers that do use handwritten ledgers, or they use Excel spreadsheets because that's what they're more comfortable with. I do think that there are a lot of advantages to become really familiar with a good financial management software system before you start your farm business, so that you can get your personal accounts going, and then you essentially open a new company, and that company would then be your farm financials. Okay, so I have another poll, and this is about the income statement. Sounds like, Emily, you might have started to think about expenses, variable or fixed expenses, if you're going to be doing cover crop seed for pollinators. See if anybody else moved in that direction. Okay, great. And polling, and again, share the results. So we have a couple of people that are in progress, and most people did not start this exercise. So as you're going to see today, when we start to talk about land, this idea of what your enterprises are going to be and what your fixed and variable costs are really going to play into what you can afford for land. So as you start to explore what you want to do, you might even want to just start to create like some type of database of the different types of enterprise budgets or lists of things that you think that you might need, because you're going to really need to be able to figure this out in how you sequence your land purchases or your land leasing with your cash flow to be able to kickstart this enterprise. Anybody have anything that they want to share about the progress, or what some of the barriers are to be going forward with this exercise? Okay. Okay, let's see. And then the final poll I have, and this is about the financial self-assessment. So if you completed the financial self-assessment, where did you assess yourself in terms of financial readiness? And share the results. Okay, so here we are. Lots to learn and needing to working on a plan. And I think that's what this course is all about. We're not expecting that people are going to be like, I have everything together and I'm ready, but it's really about exploring and understanding what you need to get together. What are some of the things that you identified that you need to do as some of those next steps in your financial self-assessment?
I feel like we just need to be more organized with all the information we're getting and putting together, and then also more research on like different enterprises and stuff. We just didn't really have time over the last week to do that. So
Sure, absolutely. Anyone else?
I think continuing to think about positive constraints, so that we're not just looking for land, but more thinking through what we might want to grow, where that might limit us, all of the, like, trying to actually put in place positive constraints so that it narrows the scope of where we might look and how that land might work with possible crops that we also might be interested in or have the capabilities to do within our budget.
I get that. Yes. Well, that's great, because that's really what we're going to be looking at today are some of, like, I love how you say that, a positive constraint. So we're going to be talking about how to choose a target location, how to think and find out about land prices and rental rates. And then we're going to be talking about conducting a land assessment, and I'll be walking through a bunch of online tools that exist for doing that. So kind of a big macro scale of finding land. So one is selecting a target location or set of locations for your land search. And this is really based on your personal and business goals. So once you know what you're looking for in the type of land, the size of parcel, then you're going to be able to really move into finding more about real estate, what it's going to cost, what the different rental values are. And that might be very different across the state or across the region if you look outside of Idaho. And we'll talk about some of the factors that really impact land values. And then we're going to look at a deeper dive into some of the things that you're going to need to consider when you consider what land would be suitable for your, for your purposes, and then really moving into developing that plan and giving you some tools to be able to do some assessment of the different land options that you're looking at. So choosing a target location. One thing that's really important is to find out about the ag and business conditions and whether or not a community is really supportive of local agriculture and the type of agriculture that you're interested in engaging in. And that's something that happens at the state level, but also the community level. And we'll be talking about some specific things to look at in things like food codes and land use codes at the local level and at the state level. And then there's your personal goals as well as your business goals of what is the quality of life you want and what is the community, what are the community assets that you want to have in terms of your social and family goals. So do you want to be near family or friends, or do you want to have, some type of access to transportation to get to see them? That's a huge consideration, especially in a rural life situation. You want to be near a city or a big town that has maybe some of the cultural amenities that you get in terms of access to art or access to things like the symphony or plays. Are those things important to you? Or access to sports events? Or are you okay being in a really remote location? How important is it that you have really fast broadband for your work or for the quality of life you want? Because many locations that are really rural are just not going to have that broadband in Idaho. So thinking about those things. And then, do you want to be close to things like a university or a hospital? What type of amenities would you like the community to have? You want to know about that hospital rating or the medical services that are in a particular community. Do you have access to a veterinarian that is going to service the type of livestock or even pets that you want to have on your place? So really assessing what is around you. And then part of what you need to think about is also, what about as you or your children grow older? So, you know, thinking about what is it that you're going to want, especially in terms of healthcare and access to healthcare. And then if you have children or you decide to have children, what is it that they're going to want in terms of engagement in sports or extracurricular activities? Or do you really want to assess before you buy property the school district or the educational opportunities that are available to you in a specific community? So thinking about those things now is really important as you look at a macro level at your target locations. Some of the things that we're going to delve in tonight are really talking about the climate and growing season and the availability of water. And water is key for any agricultural enterprise. And that's one of the things that you're really going to need to understand about any property that you have. And then you're going to want to look at types of agriculture in the area. And this is not only in terms of competition, but also collaboration. Are there going to be mentors that are going to be able to help you as you start your agricultural enterprise? Also, the types of agriculture in an area can help you understand what's possible. That's not 100% because areas do have people that are really innovative and start to grow new things, produce new things. But generally, there are some agricultural system boundaries within different geographies. And then the land values and rental rates are really going to be different depending upon the communities and the amenities that are there and how close you are to them. A couple of other things to be able to, that you want to think about is the population characteristics and what their disposable income is for the products that you want to produce. Do you have a market for your products, and what is the competition? If your market is really saturated for the types of things that you want to produce, how would you differentiate? And then I think I see that Jen has come on. So one of the things that she struggles with is like processing. So if you are in livestock, you have to really think about the costs and availability of processing that's going to meet your needs. And then also distribution, and is there a way that you can get networked into some type of, if you're very rural, a transportation infrastructure that's going to be affordable for moving your products. I'm going to double check the time. Okay. I just wanted to go through a couple other things before I have Jen start talking. So at the macro level, there are some online tools that you can use. This is the plant hardiness zone map, and you can go online. Here is the website, and you can put in your zip code, or you can select a state, and you can browse around, and you can just see in general what the minimum and temperatures are going to be and what the plant hardiness zone is. And then you can get an idea of what crops or livestock are going to be suitable to that. So as I mentioned before, like in very high altitudes, those altitudes are suitable for some livestock and not for others. So you really need to dial into what it is that you can produce in a specific geography. Of course, this is really at a macro level, and there's going to be microclimates within a region that you're looking at, but this gives you kind of an overall bigger picture of the landscape of possibilities. And there's some things that you might find that are kind of interesting. So for Latah County, we actually have more extremes in our county of temperature extremes than there is up in Boundary County, which is the most northern county in the state. And that might not be intuitive given that, Boundary County is almost 4 hours north of us, but that's the situation because the climate is just different. So you really want to understand what is possible. You can also look at the Census of Agriculture. Again, this is a really macro level of understanding agriculture in the regions that you're looking. It's going to tell you about the number of farms, how many acres of different crops, how many number of livestock are going to be produced in that area. They do have now some market information, including direct sales. Of course, this is on a macro level, so it's not really refined. And I will say that in direct sales, there are going to be, I think, underreporting of direct sales because not everybody that is doing direct sales has completed the ag census, and the ag census sometimes doesn't know how to find people that are producing for those direct markets. It's going to talk to you about the economics of different farms, particularly in the commodity market. It will also talk about real estate value of land and buildings in areas. And again, this is mostly going to be large scale ag. And then it's going to tell you about farmers and the demographics of farmers in your region. So it's going to talk about age, it's going to talk about gender, it's going to talk about land ownership and the demographics of people that own agricultural land. So here is the web address for that. And as you know, all of these slides are going to be in the online classroom. So this is just an interesting thing that I would suggest that you go to. And the ag census happens every 5 years. So just recently, the 2017 ag census information has come, and you can go to this address right here, and you can click on any county, and it's going to give you about a 4-page summary of the ag statistics for that county. You can also then go back to 2012 and look at the ag statistics in 2012 and see the changes over time in that county. So again, this is the macro level of getting to understand different regions and the agricultural profiles of those regions. Also, it's really important to understand what the state rules are. I know a couple of people in this class are really dialed into being in Idaho, and a couple of people are thinking about, well, I could be, you know, over in Oregon, or maybe I could go outside of Idaho. I don't really know where I want to be. So you really need to look at those state level policies. In particular, the cottage food laws and the food code are really important. If you cross over into Washington, like if you're in North Idaho and you want to produce eggs, the rules are very different in Idaho than they are in Washington. And the bar is a lot higher for facilities in Washington than in Idaho. The exemptions aren't as big. Idaho is a pretty friendly state for small raw milk dairies, and that's something that has come into being in the last 10 years or so. And it might not be the same if you're over in Oregon. So you really want to understand what those state level rules are. And some states even have better cottage food laws than we do in Idaho. In Idaho, our cottage food rules are actually in our food code. And if you want to find those and you have any trouble, you can let me know. The other thing is that on a local level, you want to understand at what level our community is really supportive of agriculture. Generally speaking, in our rural areas, we're still ag dominated, but when you get into places like Moscow or Boise, there can be zoning laws that are farm friendly or farm unfriendly. And the community plans in terms of the long-term strategic plans, if they don't talk about agriculture, then that might be something that you might consider to be, well, I might be in an island and have a really big market, or I might be in a situation where I'm going to be in an environment that's not friendly to the type of agriculture that I want. And then again, looking at the community and its support for local agriculture and what that market is for you. So there's a whole host of ways that you can find out about land values and prices. The census is that macro view. Because the census looks a lot at commodity agriculture, I don't think for you all it's going to be the best place for you to find ag values, but you can contact the Farm Service Agency. We talked about that a lot last week. There are national multiple listing services. That's the MLS when you go to a realtor. And if you do go to a realtor, if you can find one that really understands agricultural land, so you might have to shop around to find somebody that can really help you really look at ag land, not at more rural living. And maybe you're going to end up combining the two of those. Your state Department of Agriculture might have some resources, but again, in whatever locale you look at, you want to go to that community and visit and talk to the people there. Go to the farmers market, you know, walk into the different real estate offices, find your ag assessors in that county and talk to them about what they're assessing ag land as in terms of the value of ag land. So when Nicole Whittam on our first class, she talked about how she really looked into the county assessor's office and how those parcels are defined. We have that same thing here in Idaho. This is actually looking at part of Latah County, and you can dial in and it will give you the tax assessed value for different parcels and whether it has an ag exemption. And after Jen talks, we can go in and look at that a little bit deeper through the live web. rental rates, it's interesting. If you go into the National Ag Survey, you can get what their survey responses were around rental rates. So for dryland crop rental rates, it was like $69.50 per acre. That's probably not what you're going to be able to rent land for, but that's what large scale dryland agriculture is renting it, but they might be renting 1,000 acres at that price. So it's very different. So again, you can look at the Ag Statistics Service, but it's probably not going to translate right over to the size of acreages you're looking at. We do have a lot of extension farm management specialists that once you've dialed in the region that you're looking in, I can connect you with them about what ag rental rates are in those regions and farmland prices, who you should be talking to about water rights and the like. Again, local real estate agents, looking at the classified ads. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but finding out what are people putting out there in terms of options, and then again, visiting the community. So if you go to this URL, this is where you can find out what the Ag Survey says about different cash rents. Depending on the county, they would have pasture rental costs, you know, what the average is, as well as different kinds of cropland. And it tells you if it's irrigated cropland or non-irrigated cropland. So rental rates are really tricky to figure out. There's a lot of variability. Definitely the marketplace plays a role. What, you know, if you're competing against people that are going to pasture horses versus agricultural products, that can be a lot, you know, affect what landowners expect to have. But again, all motivations are not financial, and you really have to invest in that relationship with the landowner. And it's really hard to find rental rates because they're not published. And so that word of mouth and talking to a lot of people is a really important source of information. We talked a little bit the first time we got together, that there's a lot of different types of landlords, and all those different types of landlords are going to have many reasons to sell or lease land. And in your conversations with them, you're going to have to understand their motivations, because that's going to be part of how you're going to be able to know whether that's a good fit for you to buy land or to lease land. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and stop here so I can jump into this for Jen, because I want to make the best use of her time. Oh, well, that's not exactly what I wanted to happen. So sorry about that. Be a little bit. There we go. Okay, so welcome, Jen. Thanks for being here tonight and talking about your land tenure story, how you found your farm. So Jen Elliot is livestock producer, and she's in Troy, Idaho, which is about 13 miles or so. Well, the town is about 13 miles, but you're a little bit farther than that from Moscow.
Yeah, we're about 18, still pretty close. I'm just still trying to connect. I can hear you, but it's really faint, and I'm just trying to connect to my Bluetooth. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you great.
Okay, let me just real quick see. I have this problem that before the pandemic, I had one computer in my house, and now I have many computers and many electronic devices that my Bluetooth wants to hook up to. So I'm having a hard time trying to figure out why it's not connecting to me, and I'm just trying to figure it out real quick. But it's kind of weird because I can't hear you very good. It's really quiet.
Is it really quiet for everyone else? I don't have my headset on, so it might not be you, Jen.
Will you get me a headset real quick?
Yeah, but I think on your computer, if you have a headset, then you can't talk with it, so you have to unplug it and then talk, and then plug it back in.
My 11-year-old's gonna clue me in on how computers and everything works because he's way better at it than I am. Let me just try one more thing. I've been having them frantically trying to unconnect everything so I can try and connect to my speaker.
Speaker is on. Connected.
Oh, I think it worked. Okay, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I kind of just chimed in here for the last 5 minutes, so I don't particularly have much knowledge about exactly who everybody is on the call today. Luckily, it's a small group, so it would be helpful for me to just have a sense of who I'm talking to, what your interests are, and I'm going to share information about finding my land, but my criteria for selecting land will likely be different than yours. So can I just have like maybe an overview of who's on the phone and or who's on the call so I know where I should focus?
Yeah, let's go around and have everyone introduce themselves. I'll just call on people as I see them. So Emily.
Hi, Emily Erickson. I am in Boise now. I'm on the board for Idaho Center for Sustainable Ag, so also listening for that educational piece, but have looked for land in areas like McCall or Driggs that we could have the mountains and also have some experience.
Right.
Tommy and Julia?
Hi, Julia here. We are currently in the Idaho Falls area and not really sure where we're looking to move, but our main interest in taking this class is for like a small family self-sustainable farm with crops and livestock for our own family.
Okay, thanks. Anna.
I'm Anna Bratnoff. I'm living in Moscow right now. I'm hoping to stay on the Palouse if I can. Some of that kind of depends on job stuff. But I'm hoping to find kind of a small piece of land to raise like dairy goats to make soaps, and then maybe some other livestock for myself, as well as like herbs and that sort of stuff.
Okay, great. So I switched to my headset. I just want to check in that this is better sound.
Okay, it sounds way better for me hearing you in the headset than it did before.
Okay, great. So I will leave my headset on. Okay, let's see. Karen.
Yes, I'm in the Nampa area and have no livestock experience other than having been a horse owner, and I'm interested in exploring raising geese for meat products as well as breeding of specialty endangered breeds.
Great, thank you. And we have 2 people on, Jen, that don't have mic access. And so this is Janelle and her son, Ryan. They live on acreage in Hayden, but hope to move further north in a couple of years to be closer to good feed sources, possibly being able to produce what feed they need for a change in rabies, for raising their livestock. They raise Dexter and Charlet, is that right? Cattle presently, but are open to different ideas when they move. They want land with irrigation, which they don't have now. And then other participants in the class that aren't on tonight, we have a couple that are currently in Georgia, and they will, one is a veteran, the other is active military, but they're going to leave that and they're going to move outside of Boise or just across the border in Oregon because they have family that's close to there and they want to raise cattle.
Okay. And then maybe can you give me a little idea of what you'd like me to focus on? Do you just want me to talk about how we chose land and what that kind of history is of how we ended up where we are and kind of our decision-making process?
Yes, absolutely. And then And then, you know, when you were looking for land, like how did you assess that? And then when you actually got your land, what are some of the things that worked out really well, but some of maybe the unanticipated things you found out about your land when you were on it?
Great. And how much time do I have?
You have, you know, about 15 plus minutes for your story, and then we have time for Q&A.
Okay.
Okay.
So at some point when I'm not too busy farming, I will write a book about how we found land, because that is how many stories there are that we laugh about today about where we didn't end up and why we're really glad where we did end up. So I'll try and highlight the things that I think are probably most critical and that we have found to be kind of the things that make it feel like it was a really good choice where we ended up where we are and where we had looked and the process that we went through to find this place. I'll also try and highlight some of the things that I think, it sounds like most people are interested in livestock, which is great. That adds another layer of what you look for. And I'll try and kind of highlight some of those things too. So my husband and I, when we got together and decided that we were interested in owning property, raising livestock, having a family on a rural piece of property, decided that we didn't want our choices to be driven by things like jobs. So we didn't follow a job and then try and find something there. We really decided, and we're, because of our situation of kind of both having jobs in urban areas and just really saving for a long time and knowing that that's what our goal was, really took a period of time where we just went and traveled all over the places we thought we wanted to be, because we kind of had, which I'm sure all of you do, this picture in your mind of like, if only I had the property that had these 10 things, like that would be ideal, you know? And we had that list. And the things on that list were things like good water, you know, being on water somewhere would have been really cool. Didn't get that one. We had to create our own water that we were on. Things like location. So as I kind of say some of these things to us were at the top of our list, and those were the critical ones. Location, like I can't say enough. And I heard at the tail end of Colette talking a little bit about that. But if your goals of owning a piece of property include and hope to be with a business focus, like you want to raise livestock and you want to be able to market that to other people interested in what you're raising, location is critical. Having access to a market, and I kind of, again, heard the tail end, but in my business with livestock, raising beef and pork, having a quality processor nearby is a huge, huge factor. One that we didn't even consider when we were in this, because we were, you know, in the ideal stage where you guys all are. And so thinking about what it takes to make that business function, access to feed. I heard somebody mention, I think in the chat, about that, raising your own feed or having access to somebody else that does have good quality feed are pretty critical. Water is a critical thing. Heard some of you are on the Palouse. You know, our local aquifer is getting capped pretty hard, and knowing before you invest a lot of money with land prices the way that they are right now, knowing that you have a secure water source is pretty huge too. So I guess I'll switch back a little bit. So when we've kind of decided we want to have a piece of land, we want to be near, you know, an ideal, nice community that, and we've determined since, you know, we've been together that things that are important to us are also being within, living in a rural area, but also being within a certain proximity to a large enough population of people, and you know, we've kind of connected it for us to be near a university community where there's arts and educational opportunities. Like, I just knew that we were going to be starting a family wherever we moved, and I wanted to be able to, my kids to have swimming lessons, or to be able to, you know, take an art class, or go on a, you know, bike trail somewhere. And so those were the kinds of things, like finding a community that has the attributes that you feel are important to your bigger picture beyond thinking about just your farm part of your life. Because if you are just in the beginning stages about thinking about starting a farm, there isn't a separation. Like, farm life and your normal life become, like, you know, intertwined, and they are one in the same thing. And so thinking about what your needs are for your family and you as humans, and making sure that those needs are met, is pretty important too. And just access and distance to being close to the things you need. You know, when we first started out, we kind of, again, had this ideal thought of, well, let's live off grid. And we looked at quite a few properties where we would have not been able to have access to power. And after going through the process of, and so I'll kind of tell you what we did end up with. We looked at a lot of places that had infrastructure, which typically on farm ground is either really expensive if it's good quality, or it's pretty run down if it's a bargain. So you're getting something that's a total fixer-upper, and you need to have the skills and the ability to make that into what you want it to if you don't have the money to just outright buy it. That was our situation. We couldn't find something in our price range that felt like it met our criteria of what we wanted, that wasn't a falling down piece of junk that we just didn't want to own. So we bought a bare piece of ground that didn't have anything on it and built everything ourselves. I'll say the caveat to that is my husband is like a building construction mechanic extraordinaire, and I am his right-hand man. And so the two of us together have done everything on our property. We've built every single building on our place. We've built every road. We've built, this doesn't mean like paying somebody to do it. Like, we own the equipment, we build it all ourselves. So also, to me, another critical thing in looking for a piece of land is assessing your skill set. Do you and your partner, whoever you're planning on doing this with, have the same idea of what you want to do and how you want to move forward? And make sure those are both incorporated into what you're looking for. Because if it's, you know, the layers of operating a farm can get really deep. Like, I mean, I've been on the tractor all day planting fields, and I had to call my husband. I got to get on this call. Can you come get the tractor out of the field? Like, that's what it's like when you're in the middle of spring planting season. It's hectic and there's a lot going on, and making sure that you have the same idea of what your goals are and what you're looking for. My other comment would be patience. We all want to have this, you know, idealistic place now and start building on it now. But if you rush yourself into buying something that doesn't feel right, and you're kind of forcing it because you just need a place to be and you're in some odd situation, you need to get out of this and into something else quick, like, those things don't typically line up right. My advice would be patience. Anything that is the right fit will feel right and will have the main criteria that you're looking for as part of it. You know, we looked for probably 4.5 years. We weren't even looking on the Palouse. We were looking all over. We were trying to find somewhere in Western Montana because we just love the mountains, outdoors, being on rivers, and that's where we were living at the time. But like I said, we did a road trip all over the place trying to find the ideal place, and came home after 6 months realizing, there aren't ideal places anymore. So keep it in mind, like, find your ideal, what works for you and meets the most important criteria for you, and be willing to compromise on the things lower down on the list. Like, one of our things, we looked at some properties where we were just like, I don't know how they'd ever sell this place. There's like high voltage power lines sizzling above the house, and you know, a nuclear reactor site, like it's chain link fence right next to the property at this place we looked at in Montana. I mean, unreal sometimes what you see and what a realtor can crop out of an image until you actually physically go take a look at it. You know, people saying, oh, there's water on the property, and then you get there and actually it's like the neighbor's property, and the property lines aren't well defined, all these different layers of things that create major problems when all of a sudden you're going to put up a fence for your cows and your neighbor's like, well, the farmer has been farming it there, and this is kind of like where we think it is. And then you get a surveyor out there and no, actually it's like 20 feet onto your property that is my property. So and always just keeping your eye out, having it in the back of what other things that you're doing, and knowing that you are just constantly looking. That's why it took us so long. We ended up over here. I mean, I went to school at U of I, so I'm not new to the Palouse. But we ended up over here one winter when we were living in central Montana on a farm in the middle of nowhere, where my husband was looking at a piece of equipment and randomly saw this spot, and it had been on the market for one day. I went and walked it, looked at it, and I called him. I'm like, this is the place. We need to make an offer on it. What were the things that I saw when I looked at this? It had that were our kind of deciding criteria. We knew there were good wells in the area. It was about the size of land that we were looking in, and about the price range that we were looking. It had some timber and some fields, because we knew we wanted to have pastures for animals. It had potential for building ponds, which is something that we've added since we've lived here for watering livestock and just for aesthetics. It had power nearby, so that expense was less than if it was a property. I mean, like there's properties within a few miles of our place that people have bought, and then they find out, oh, it's going to be $50,000 for me to get power to my property. So looking into all those details of things. One of the things that was on my not very excited about on my property list was power lines. And we have those stretching on a half mile along the county road and another portion. But it's right on the perimeter on the county road. And now I actually see those as kind of an advantage. They're great perches for all sorts of birds of prey, and we collect all sorts of owl pellets from them all the time that the kids like to dissect. So it's kind of blended into the background, and it's not part of our visual. It doesn't impact our visual, but that was one thing that's on my list that I've looked at so many places where it was just like, oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine having these power lines here all the time. It's such an aesthetically unpleasing thing. So there might be things in particular that you have on your list that are just a, you know, deal breaker. Our proximity to town, about 30 minutes out of what I feel like is a nice size, big enough but small enough community, was a huge factor. And I've heard of people just even nearby that are maybe 15 minutes beyond us, that it's been a deal breaker, just 15 minutes. Because if you just think about the logistics of living your life, where you go grocery shopping, where you need to get fuel from, where you go to a farmer's market to sell products, where you have a meat processor accessible, all of those layers of things, when you add it to your daily routine of what it takes to operate your business or your family, can get daunting and be really stressful. Are there other major things that I haven't covered yet that you wanted me to, Colette?
No, I think if we walk through your slides, though, there will probably be other things that you want to share, and I have them all below this deck. So maybe we would do that, and then if there's something that comes to my mind, I'll ask, or I want to welcome everybody that's in the class to either unmute and ask questions or write them in the chat.
Okay.
Okay.
So this picture on the left that you're looking at, that's our shop building down. We kind of, I kind of have a design background, and so I was pretty thoughtful about how we laid our property out, because on these Palouse hills, it's like finding flat spots sometimes and having separation between farmness, which is typically has a layer of messiness that I don't necessarily want in my house. So our barnyard is kind of down below a hill on a flat away from where our house is. In this picture, our house is kind of up to the left, which is the picture on the right. But somebody mentioned kids and a farm. We built our place when we first started and built our house that we have right now. It was just my husband and I, and then a couple years in, we had 2 kids, which are now both in elementary school. And we've started our whole business and our whole farm operation with a family in tow. And so it's doable and has a lot of great attributes to do as well. I just included some pictures of things we see around our place. We have bluebird boxes all over our property. We've done a lot of restoration work. I am a landscape architect by trade and have a real affinity for native planting, Palouse Prairie. That's why my farm is named Palouse Prairie, because I do a lot of native plant restoration and Palouse Prairie restoration in particular in our draws. We fenced them all out from our cows. And so when we bought our property, and my husband and I kind of bat this back and forth a lot, because he's sometimes gives me a hard time that I have transitioned like viable pasture, as he calls it, into planting areas. And my argument is that diversity is the key to success. We need more diversity. And these areas that I'm planting now that have, you know, the ones that I planted before we even built our house, like 2 months after we bought the property, are now, you know, 20, we have 30, 40 foot tall aspens in our draws. Timber patches, I probably planted 25 acres of all of our draws that in my mind, the way that they naturally would have been had they not been stripped of timber and all vegetation to be farmed, would have been in those anyway. And my constant thing to him is that if you could have bought our property now with all of that, this diversity of vegetation and timber, and provides like habitat for wildlife and shade for our trees, wind breaks, I mean, you name it, there's so many benefits to having more diverse vegetation. And he's just like, yeah, I would have bought that, and we couldn't have afforded it. So instead of getting a piece of ground that had all the things on it, I've spent the last dozen years creating and turning it into, and it's my passion to take care of this piece of ground in a way that I think it should, or we think that it really should be. This is just a picture of our cows. I did put a little video in there when Colette kind of mentioned to me that she was asked me to participate in this. I move my cows every day because we do a managed grazing strategy, and I was just out there and I'm like, oh, I'll just take a little video, because there's just something about walking through a group of cows on fresh green grass in the spring. They're big and fat because they're about ready to burst with having their calves. And they just look happy and they sound contented. All you hear is munch, 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 chewing grass. And yeah, so that's kind of, to me, one of the delights of having livestock. That was a picture of our new no-till seed drill. We're doing a lot of cover cropping and animal rotations. These are our heritage hogs that we raise, that we put on also cover crops and rotate around through pens and that kind of thing. More pigs.
And we will get to that video, Jen. It's just down in the slide deck a little ways.
I don't know. This pig just seems happy. He just looks like he's smiling. I might just be making, personifying it, but. This is one of our cover crops, and we're really working hard. So this is one thing that when we bought our place, we didn't look at. We didn't do soil tests. We didn't walk the fields because that just doesn't seem like an important factor, even though you're buying it to farm. And that has been one of our biggest challenges. Our soils used to grow timber. It got clear cut, except for, so we own 105 acres. We had about 13 of, really rough timber. And then I've planted another 25 acres into timber and vegetated draws. But it has been and continues to be our biggest challenge to build our soil back up to be able to grow crops without having high inputs. And so we are big time part of the regenerative agriculture movement that is using livestock as a tool to restart the biology in our soil by having a diversity of plants and livestock on the land and all of those layers of things. This is one of our cows in the middle of a cover crop, grazing it right now with a bunch of phacelia, which is not something, we plant a lot of stuff that aren't meant for cows to eat and are happy that they don't eat it because we want the plant cover. And that's what this is. These are just some of our seedlings that I plant. Typically, I plant 3,000 seedlings or plants every single spring. These are more ones that we started. These are some of the, this is a native hawkweed, which is one of my favorite plants. But we did a Palouse Prairie seeding, and that's what some of the different things are that you're seeing in some of these pictures.
Here's the video. Can you hear?
I can hear it, but I don't see it moving. Is this the video? This looks like I think that's a picture. Oh, this is the video.
It's pretty slow.
You can hear the grass getting eaten though. So I see a question from, is it Janelle and Ryan? How did you decide what plants are most helpful? I just use what naturally would grow here. So like all sorts of native woody vegetation. Palouse Prairie plants are pretty special and specific to our regional area. And there's just a laundry list. I mean, when you start looking at how a prairie typically used to function and how grazing herds of animals really helped make those cycle right, it's unreal how many different types of plants can grow synergistically together in the same area because they're growing at a different time of year. They're looking to different depths of the water cycle, or their roots are growing differently, and they can coexist happily together. I mean, it's hundreds, if not thousands of different plants can coexist together. So it's really probably specific to your regional area. We are lucky in Latah County to have an amazing soil and water conservation district in Latah County, but this conservation districts are always really helpful and very hands-on about providing really detailed information about what the best choices for plants are. We don't breed our own pigs, but we buy weaner pigs. I decided over the dozen plus years that I've been farming that while everybody talks about a real diversity of livestock and how great it is challenging to be good at all of those. So I have determined that I can be really good at having one breeding livestock, which is cows, and be really successful and good at that. And then I add smaller things into that, like having pigs, where I buy, like this year I have 16 pigs and I grow those out, and that's all I do with pigs. I don't have them over the winter. I'm happy to see them go in the winter. I'm excited to see them come in the spring because they're super awesome to have. But you will find your balance of what works for you on your farm. That's what works for me.
I have a question, Jen. So you have 105 acres, but I also know that you lease some neighboring acreage. Can you talk a little bit about why you went to having to lease additional acreage? And then how does that work in terms of your working with those landowners to run your animals there?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I wanted to mention that because I do find that there are so many opportunities to lease land where you don't have to own any land, or you don't have to own all of the land that you operate on. So like I said, we own 105. We also lease from one neighbor a 160. This is actually on this right here where our cows are this spring, is on a 160 that we lease from a neighbor. And it's, you know, we can walk cows between our properties, which is really convenient. We also lease another 40 acres from a neighbor on the other side. We've gotten lucky enough with people seeing how we manage our land that they want us to do that. And I think lucky enough now that we can walk our animals between properties where they're all neighboring our property, which is really amazing, but it didn't start out that way. We have leased properties in other places where it seems like it's going to work, where it's only 5 miles away. It only takes 5 minutes to drive over there, but there's a big difference when your animals are somewhere else, and it just adds a whole nother layer of trying to manage them. So I think that the leasing from other people is a great option. And just in thinking about this and wanting to talk with you today, there is a barrier between making connections with people that I'm not really sure how to break that down. We get approached by so many people about, oh, well, we really like how you raise your animals. Can you, we've got 5 acres. Can you bring your animals over to my place and graze them? And there's just so many layers involved with having a piece of property. Again, access to, my first questions are always, where are you located? Do you have water and fencing? Because those are always the most critical things, because, even this piece of property right here, it's 168 acres of fencing with, I think that's like 4 miles of perimeter fence and a whole bunch of interior fences that are 40 years old. And yes, every single spring I'm going out and propping that fence back up. And we use a lot of high tensile electric temporary fencing. That's how I move this 13-acre paddock right here. That's how I move animals through that. And we've got a really amazing water system that we built that's like a solar pumped water system. But even this spring, right now, we're in the process of putting in more water. We've determined that we are going to graze all of our leased properties this year in addition to our own, because we're just trying to reduce the amount of time that we have to feed and expand the amount of time that we graze, and having things growing longer too. So I think I'm getting off on a tangent, but yes, there's opportunities out there for leasing, and it's just really hard when you are just starting out to try and even think of how you would connect to those people. And it almost feels to me like when you start and people see what you do, then all of a sudden there is this interest, because there's so many people that live in rural Idaho, rural all over, that want to live in a rural setting and have zero interest in managing their property. I mean, I can't even tell you, we were kind of laughing the other day because it felt like, a decade ago when we started that everybody had cows. We're the last ones standing. when we hear a cow crying somewhere, anywhere within like a, you know, what we can hear, maybe a 2-mile radius of our house, it's our cow, and we should probably be paying attention to that. Unless it's somebody that wandered really far, it's not, it's our cow. And so, but, you know, there's even, you know, even this 40-acre piece that's close by, like, people want to live on small acreage, but it's hard to manage that. It's hard to, we didn't go into this thinking, oh, well, we're going to start taking up leases all over the place. It's finding the right balance of having enough animals to manage your ground, but then having enough feed for the different times of the year where feed is coming on like crazy. Like right now, like we can't move animals fast enough through how much grass we have before it goes to seed. And then having enough ground to be able to put hay up to feed them through the winter. So that's kind of why we morphed into that. And also just because these ones that we're doing now in particular, which we've had the 160 for about 5 years, we had several others, like I said, that were not ideal that we gave up when this became available, because there's a huge difference in hauling, you know, 60 cows, you know, to another property, even if it's 5 minutes away, and being able to walk them across the road. Like, we don't even have to put up blocking fences anymore. Like, they just know. They're like, oh, we're going to go across the street. Great. And they just walk over there. No big deal. There's no rodeo. There's no getting excited. They're just casually like, okay, the next field to go to, as if it was our own. So finding things that are close enough and convenient that they really work for your system, I think, is important.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a question for Jen? Okay.
I would say one more thing about the cost of land and how that feels so prohibitive. That has really ballooned out of proportion in my mind. Disappointingly, because it really feels like it limits people's ability to get into farming that want to, particularly young people, with land being so expensive. I find it really discouraging. That being said, I think you can do a lot on a small piece of land, and I would really consider what your reasonable amount of money you can spend is. Extending yourself beyond what you can manage financially in farming is going to lead to a lot of challenges. There's many times where we've had conversations, my husband and I, that if we were in the situation right now that other people are with having to buy land, and we were making payments on this and all the work that it takes to operate it, it would be really hard to maintain it. So I guess my advice in regards to the cost of things, opt for less cost, less land, something that's more manageable. And as soon as you get those details figured out about what it is that you need to make your business work and get things started, then I think it'll open more doors for opportunities. Once you settle yourself into a place in a community and know that you want to be there for a long period of time, that's the other thing I was going to say, is that people are so flip happy about stuff. If you're going to make a commitment and a decision about something, I would make sure that you're planning on being there for a while, because it takes a pretty big investment of time and money just to get up and running with livestock. I mean, I've talked to lots of other livestock producers, and with vegetable producers to, you know, like if you're producing for market or something, yeah, if you get to 5 years and beyond, you're doing pretty good. With livestock, 10 years is kind of the bar. If you can make it to 10 years and you're still going and you're still enthused about it, okay, you probably are, you know, rolling to some sustainability. It takes a lot longer because the investments are so much greater, especially the larger animals that you get into.
Yeah, Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Jen. And thanks for sharing your story and your experience. We really appreciate your joining us tonight and getting off the tractor and coming in. You know, these stories really do make a difference and help people understand what it means to find land and have that land. And so we, again, thank you for being on tonight.
Well, thanks for having me, and I wish the best to all of you, and I applaud you for being good stewards of the land, because it takes more people that care about one small piece of ground and providing one service or food to their community to make things all function better and get through things like we're dealing with right now. It is unprecedented what we're seeing in the livestock industry happening right now. And the more small scale producers that we have, the more resilient we'll be in situations like these. I have had an unparalleled interest in my products this year. I sent out an email to my customer list, and within a week, every single one of my pigs was sold, and half of the beef I have available for the whole year was sold. I think people are starting to realize the value of having something in a local food system and knowing how it's produced and where it's coming from are more than ever, with what we have going on right now, pretty important. So good job for all of you for thinking about moving towards owning something and having a small farm yourself. I encourage you to keep charging forward and don't let all of the negatives that pile up, because they'll be high. Just knock them down. Just keep the positives in the viewpoint.
Okay, awesome. So we do have one final question, Jen. Can you give an estimate about what ag land prices are going for in Latah County, or rental rates?
Wow. So there is no such thing as ag land prices. It doesn't exist. Even on a large scale. I mean, I recently saw, I want to say it was like a 1,200 acre farm or something for sale. And the prices on that were, I want to say it was in the $45,000 to $5,000 range. I mean, it was high. It was incredibly high. And I don't think it had any structures. And you start getting that down to like small acreages, where it's, maybe a 10, 20 acre parcel. Just as an example, in my neighborhood, we've had quite a few properties that have been divided up. Latah County does have some regulations for number of building permits for certain size of land, but there seems to be some things happening that are shifting that so that people can divide up a little more than we've seen in the past. I'm not sure if there's actually been some zoning changes to allow that, but a small parcel of property that is 10 acres, had nothing on it, no well, not good soil, went for $150. So what is that? 15,000 an acre. That was a small acreage parcel in Troy. And then you add on top of that anything that has any sort of structures or fencing or a well or a road or all those layers of things, and it's just exponentially more than that. It's not encouraging. I mean, and honestly, the reason we ended up here, and again, like that 4.5 to 5 year time frame that we were looking for a piece of property. I mean, every time we went somewhere, it was just like we were always looking to what was available. But we ended up here instead of Western Montana because at the time, ground there was $10,000 an acre, and there was no way we were ever going to be able to make that happen. And it just feels like it's starting to spread further and further. So I don't really have any encouraging things on that. Rental rates for ag ground, that's pretty positive. and it's kind of a complicated relationship, but our neighbors that we lease from, we don't really pay a real going rate for them because they're like family. I mean, like, it's the grandma to my children, the woman that we rent the 160 from, and she can't manage it at all herself. And so we do a lot of maintenance. We put up hay for horses and put it in her barn. Like, there's a lot of trading that goes on. But I guess that's kind of what I mean. Like, she isn't particularly looking for the going rate of ag land. She just wants her land to be taken care of, and she can't do it. And she just is so happy to have animals on her place and to be able to see calves running around her property, because she used to run cows herself before she was 85. And so I think there's a lot of aging people in our community that would be happy to have somebody run animals on their property. Same thing with our other neighbor. It's so weedy and the fences are so falling down. We paid him, I want to say, $20 an acre last year, which is pretty low. I think the going rate for if you have a fenced property with decent fencing and water is in like the $40-$45 an acre. We paid him 20, and this year he's like, after he saw how we we cut hay on his place, we're going to graze it this year for the first time. He's just like, you're doing so much to try and better our place. Like, we're planting a cover crop over there this year. He's like, you don't have to pay me anything. I mean, it didn't amount to hardly anything for what we paid him last year anyway. And he's just like, you're going to make it so much better. I don't have the time to deal with it. Just use it. And so we're kind of coming to an agreement that we're going to eventually fence his place for him. And that's going to be better for us to graze and all those layers of things. So there are opportunities out there for leasing. And I really think that's a great way to get into it. And just when you're in a neighborhood and people see what you're doing, just like us, they want you to come do something on their land. Exactly. And as we see rural properties having more increasing aged population of people, I think that's going to even be more prevalent.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jen. So, any
last questions?
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it, Jen. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, everybody. So I want to respect the time of our class. And so I'm just going to wrap up with kind of reviewing some of these key factors that affect land values. And then we'll pick up next week with our presentation, which is going to be talking more about assessing land. So, of course, as Jen said, location, 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 that is a huge thing in this competition for land and for land uses. Soil does make a difference if you're really looking at ag land prices, and it is being priced as agricultural land. That soil productivity will make a difference. Water is huge, and you have to have water. Jen didn't have time to go into her water availability. They have a natural spring on the property, and they were able, so in addition to wells, they have spring water, and they use a solar system to pump that water to the top of a hill on their property, and then they gravity feed it to their different pastures. And that has been a game changer for them. As Jen said, if you have improvements on the land in terms of buildings, fences, there's going to be a land value for that. And that current property condition makes a lot of difference. And then these landowner needs and wishes and the tax base are things that you will want to consider. So in setting a price, you really have to negotiate what's based on what's real and what you can afford. And that's why we've been asking you to put so much attention into your finances and understanding your finances. So whether you start with leasing or you start with a small property and you're going to build that out, you just have to know what you're going to afford. And then as Jen said, she has some trades that she's doing with the landowners that she's leasing from. And so those are things that you might be able to offer as part of a negotiation for a price of property, even if you're purchasing a small piece of property, but you can do some trade for land management on the other side. So really what we're talking about is that beyond this great vision for what you want to do is having a plan. And there are so many resources out there that are really pretty straightforward guides for developing a business plan and a marketing plan that will help guide you in your decisions. So we put some of those resources together for you, and a lot of these books, just like this curriculum, have a lot of very simple worksheets to help walk you through the process. So Farming Alternatives, this is a free download. It is an amazing resource that is going to go over some of the things that I've gone over about key financial statements and business planning, but also helping you to identify what your market is. How do you assess if there's a market in a region? And then moving into looking at how do you develop your marketing message so it goes kind of the next level for different farm enterprises. Holistic management, if you're looking in livestock, this is a great entry resource about holistic management and how to think about that in terms of setting your goals and making your decisions about your land. We have this Financial Fitness for Farmers webinar series that's recorded on the Cultivating Success site that delves into the key financial statements. And then this book right here is another walkthrough guide about developing business plans for farms or ranches, again, with a lot of these very simple worksheets. So it's not that you have to pull things out of the air. All of these assignments that we're giving you are in this progression to be really ready to make that investment in agricultural land. And again, this will be things that we will be sharing with you in this slide deck. There are some resources like Ag Plan where it asks you a series of questions and you create an account, and at the end you have a business plan that you can print. There's also templates for those that would rather not go through an online system. Again, I talked about a number of these resources: the Small Business Development Center, Northwest Farm Credit, the Ag Vision Program. Our guest next week will be a farm advisor from that program, and then the Farm Service Agency. So, do you have any questions before we wrap up tonight about resources for finding land? Okay. Well, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Our presentation went a bit longer than anticipated with Jen, but I felt like what she had to say was so important for land seekers, and what she was sharing was so valuable that I wanted to give the time to her. So next week we were going to pick up and be really looking about some of the key aspects of land that you'll want to consider, and also we will be moving forward with this idea that you've been able to do some of your financial assessment. So I'm going to leave the assignments from last week out there. If you can make some progress on those key financial statements, that will be great. Also, if you can have some more conversations about what your potential enterprises would be and do a bit of research on those, that's also going to help you as we move into looking at assessing agricultural land. What you want to do with it really makes a difference on what you look for on that land in that community. So if you can spend some time thinking about not just what you want to grow, but what are the attributes of the communities that you want to live near and the distance you're willing to travel to be able to engage in those amenities. So if you could brainstorm a list of that for next week and then work on those financial assignments from last week for next week, that would be great. Okay, any questions or comments, any reflections on the presentation that you want to share? Some things that came up for you when you heard Jen talking? Okay, well, I'm going to let you all go then. Thanks for joining tonight, and we'll see you next week for our final class session, and that's really going to focus on the site assessment component, delving into that, and then we'll be really focusing on preparedness to purchase land, since that is where most people in this group are focusing. So thank you all and have a really good night.